Jules Chéret was born in Paris in 1836 into a far from affluent family, and he left school at the age of 13 to begin a 3-year apprenticeship at a lithographic printer's. Once he'd completed the apprenticeship, he went on to study at the École Nationale de Dessin in the city. Although he'd originally hoped to find success as a painter, he quickly realised that he also needed to find commercial work in order to pay the bills. Unfortunately, he didn't find immediate favour with Parisian clients, and although he did pick up 1 or 2 poster commissions, it wasn't enough to call a living. And in 1859, at 23 years old, he left for London to undertake yet more training in the use of lithography. He also found some freelance work while living there, and he didn't return to Paris until 1866. This time around he fared considerably better than with his first attempt. Chéret immediately began taking commissions for posters for the numerous Parisian cabaret venues and music halls, including the immensely popular Folies Bergère, Théâtre de l'Opéra and the Moulin Rouge. And as so frequently happens, his work for these high-profile Parisian clients attracted many more clients, who were predominantly also from the world of theatre and entertainment. During his stay in London, Chéret had created some graphic work for the perfume manufacturer Eugène Rimmel, and in the year of his return to Paris, the two struck a business deal with Rimmel's considerable financial investment in the creation of Chéret's own lithographic print company. Rimmel financed the importation of huge state-of-the-art printing presses from London, and once they were set up, the company was ready to go. Other than a couple of earlier attempts, virtually all lithography had up to this point been monochrome, and in the beginning the use of colour in Chéret's posters was understandably cautious, and frequently only 2 colours were used. But his understanding of the technical constraints and possibilities of the method led to increasingly sophisticated use of colour, with numerous print runs, some of which employed gradation from one colour to another. One of the key defining features of his work throughout his career was his extremely creative approach to the range of mark-making techniques and textures he employed within any given piece of work. He would use a wide range of brushes, crayons and whatever else came to hand to produce stippled effects, graceful curves and gestural swirls, which combined to give the images unprecedented levels of visual energy and interest. At the time, it was common practice for the illustrator to create their design on paper or board, and this image would then be transferred by technicians onto the lithographic stones for printing. Consequently, the artist was at the mercy of the technician, and however successful the results, the end product was not necessarily faithful to the original design. But with his own means of production and the remarkable level of his understanding of the possibilities of the process, Chéret was able to produce far more convincing results by drawing directly onto the stones himself. This enabled him to maintain artistic control of all aspects of the work, and to establish a clearly recognisable and innovative design approach. For a few years he was in the fortunate position of being number one in a field of one, as he was technically and creatively ahead of any competitors, and even when others began to rise to the challenge of emulating his processes, he remained at the very forefront as the guiding light of the poster art community. He was easily the most sought-after poster artist in Paris, and he was producing a remarkably high volume of images which were widely displayed and admired throughout French towns and cities. Among Chéret's many contributions to the aesthetic development and increased sophistication of poster art in the 19th century was his determination to graphically unite the illustrated and lettered elements into one clear design. And there is fairly strong evidence that he was certainly one of the first and easily the most graphically successful. In historical terms, Chéret's work predated the Art Nouveau movement by a couple of decades, and although some elements of his approach did get absorbed into the work of Art Nouveau artists and designers, Chéret's work was always more informally structured and gesturally drawn, owing more to the Impressionist school of painting as exemplified by his contemporaries Monet and Renoir. The evidence of his output clearly shows that Chéret intuitively understood better than most that a guaranteed way to get your posters noticed was to feature an image of a young attractive female, either on her own or prominently placed within scenes with other characters. And increasingly this became a defining feature of his work. His portrayals of women were never overtly sexual, but undoubtedly had blatantly erotic appeal, and they were stylish, confident and free-spirited characters. These images were immensely popular with the French public, and before long they were affectionately christened Les Chérettes, and they were considered to be symbolic of a new liberated and independent French woman. Such was his celebrity and reputation at this time, he was awarded the Légion d'honneur by the French government in 1890 for his outstanding contributions to the graphic arts. This is the printed catalogue for an 1891 exhibition of posters, and for those of us, which is all of us, who take full colour printing for granted, I think it's quite instructional to see just how many separate partial images had to be created and printed in precise register to produce the final result. In 1895, Chéret created the Maître de l'Affiche collection, a significant publication of reproductions of his own work and that of more than 90 other Parisian poster artists of the period. By this time, his pioneering explorations of the potential of colour stone lithography had revolutionised what illustration could be, and the gathering of these collections into book form was one of the earliest examples of how illustration, in continental Europe at least, was being increasingly recognised as a valid art form in itself, rather than a vulgar commercial offshoot of fine art. And for the next 2 decades, Chéret remained at the epicentre of the culture of what came to be known as la Belle Époque. And there was no apparent drop in either volume or quality, and his always distinctive and visually rewarding images continued to push at the technical and creative possibilities of poster art. Although his work for the world of entertainment continued as before, he was also in great demand from other clients, and he created many arresting images promoting Parisian shops and magazines, and a particularly long-running successful campaign for the domestic oil Saxolane, featuring his trademark Chérettes. He'd also continued to maintain a career as a painter, and although he increasingly allowed the frivolity of his poster work to spill over into his art, and exhibited successfully enough, he would never come close to matching his popularity as an illustrator. Unless you see some of the actual printed posters now exhibited in museums and galleries, it's difficult to comprehend the size that many of them were actually reproduced. I hope this mock-up gives a better indication of their scale in human terms. Not all his posters were so big, and his work was published in any number of formats and sizes. There were both landscape and portrait formats, and frequently these were extreme in terms of the ratio of width to height. But every time he placed all elements perfectly within the dictated area with graphic clarity and compositional skill. The physical evidence, or more precisely the lack of it, suggests that he had little interest in other graphic outcomes, and examples of book or magazine work are extremely thin on the ground. Why this would be is somewhat mysterious, but maybe the obvious explanation is that he was kept more than busy enough with his commitment to the creation and printing of posters. Nevertheless, he did find time to work with Parisian jewellers, who used his designs to produce expensive and exclusive creations. By the time the 20th century came around, his business and creative productivity had made him an extremely wealthy man, and he had come a remarkably long way from his humble origins in the slums of the city. But he showed no signs of taking things easy, and his graphics and art remained as popular as ever. I had originally thought that the last dated piece of work I managed to find was this poster from 1914, when he would have been 78 years old. But although he seems to have been largely inactive during the years of the Great War, I then discovered this incomplete proof from a poster from 1921, and a couple of figure sketches from the same time, when he would have been 85, so it seems he never stopped drawing and painting. He spent a lot of his later years in Nice on the French Riviera, and by the end of his life and 6-decade-long career, Chéret had designed over 1,000 posters and had been a direct influence on later recognised masters of the poster, including Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and Alphonse Mucha. And having made an indelible and massively influential contribution to the development of lithographic printing, illustration and the design of the poster, Jules Chéret died and was buried in Montmartre, Paris in 1932 at the age of 96.